you will see in a little while why I brought in the name of Kenneth Boulding and the name of Amartya. I don't have to say which Amartya I mean. There is only one. Yes. So first, I am myself a Westerner, although I am wearing this lovely Indian clothing. And so I'm going to give some background in the Western tradition. I think you could find these things in other traditions as well, but this is the one I know. And it is relevant to India because, of course, the British came here, and you have the whole Macaulay routine. And here we are at a university granting degrees and lecturing in English. So Westerners foreseeing ecological crisis or not foreseeing ecological crisis. Now we all feel that there is some kind of ecological crisis coming today. You know, that is why they had the Rio conference 21 years ago. They get together every few years and have another one of these conferences at which they decide to do nothing. But they would not have these conferences if they did not have a sense that there is this crisis. And you know the air is getting dirtier. You know this. No one has to present you with statistics to convince you that there is something like that in terms of pollution going on. You know that the price of fuel is going up. There is a depletion problem. And you have other ways of knowing that there's some kind of crisis. Water is becoming short in the countryside in India. People are having to walk longer distance. Everybody knows there's some kind of crisis coming. Did anybody foresee this in the West? Well, here is a poem published in 1808 by William Blake. Perhaps any of you who take English medium school may know his poem, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright in the Forest of the Night. It's that poem. And he, in this poem, which is called Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you know, the city which in Israel, in Palestine, which the Romans destroyed in 70 AD. Yes? And then in Christian folklore, there was always a concept that there would be a new golden Jerusalem one day, a beautiful city, a utopia. The new Jerusalem would be the utopia. That's one bit of folklore in Christianity. And another bit in England is an idea that Jesus visited England. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? Mountains green, pleasant pastures. And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? What kind of clouds? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark, satanic hills? Those clouds are not rain clouds. They're soot clouds from the early factories running on steam engines, running on coal, sending soot up into the sky. Is this the New Jerusalem? I will not cease, it goes on, I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. So this is predicting socialism, predicting a utopian vision that technology might bring to us, but it would be a green utopia. They love this song in England. Most of the British think that this should be the national anthem. They don't want rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. They don't sing that anymore. They sing this. Thousands of them. Every time the Labour Party has a meeting, they end up singing this. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand. You have to imagine 1,000, 2,000 people singing this, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Do you understand? It's like what the Chinese singing "The East is Red." This is what the Brits said today. This is a call. If you read this correctly, the clouded hills are what must be avoided. And this is a call for what Sardarji called green democracy, ecological democracy. The people do not want clouded hills. They do not want dark satanic mills. And those things are what we all know are there in China today. The Chinese are protesting against their working conditions and against their pollution. Yes? So this is a protest born in the early days, the nascent days of the Industrial Revolution, protesting against conditions in the largest socialist country in the world today. But this protest was a call for socialism of some kind. And there were attempts to do it. There was a great British socialist named Robert Owen, and he did one thing and another, gave his factory to his workers, this, that, the other thing. You look him up, you'll see he's a fascinating character. And here's a painting representing one of his concepts of a new harmony as of 1838, and there's, so to speak, the New Jerusalem in the green. And this was done not only in England, he had also a colony in the Midwest of the North American continent, in Ohio. He was doing this kind of thing. So the whole socialist vision of utopia, going down to Sidney and Beatrice Webb, they said, would this be the new civilization? There's a whole tradition of hopes of the new world, and a lot of those hopes were green. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But we will see it was not just the socialists who had such a dream. But now to go back. How many of you have heard of Thomas Malthus? You know what he stands for. He stands for the doctrine that it is mankind's destiny to have war, pestilence, and famine. We breed like rabbits. The earth cannot support this growth of population. The population must be controlled by violent means. Yes. Now, when he set up this doctrine, that was 200 and some years ago, the population, the human population, was about 1 billion. Yes, 1,000 million. Today, 125 years later, it was 2 billion. So he seemed to be, there had been war, pestilence, and famine in between. He seemed to be a false prophet, you see. Now, we're wondering today, is this the case? I don't want to answer, but we don't want him to have been correct. We do not want to see violent, drastic reductions of human population by war, pestilence, and famine. Nobody wants that unless they're crazy. So let us hope that he was a false prophet. Let us hope that we can find an alternative to this sudden drop of population owing to causes of this kind. That's the challenge. That is the challenge, to prove that Malthus was really wrong. That's the challenge. Now, I come to another prophet, a great economist, for various reasons. Born in Australia, a very cosmopolitan man, he went to England, and and by the way, his son founded the Economic Society of India, the Indian Economic Society. His son had interesting interactions with Mohandas Gandhi. But this is the father I'm talking about today. And he wrote a book, famous book in 1865 called The Coal Question. Now, his great realization behind this book was a down-to-earth fact. You can say what you want about this and that, about the industrial revolution and capitalism. When it comes down to the material essence of the fact, it has depended on fossil fuels. We could argue logically that it was not necessary for capitalism to grow on fossil fuels, but that is in fact the way it happened, and it's still mostly happening that way. Most of our consumable energy is coming from fossil fuels. Manmohan Singh wants to have more of it come from nuclear. There's the hydro. There are all these other possibilities, but they add up to about 10, 15, 20%, still 70, 80, 90%. and we're hoping for wind and solar, but still, it has been fossil fuels. And he thought that was it, coal. He had no vision of petroleum, of gas, natural gas. And he realized the coal was going to run out. It was what we call today a non-renewal, what Kumarappa called a bucket. Yes? And he sensed this bucket would run out, and then everything would change. That was his prophecy. Let me read it, because this man is like a disciple of Macaulay. Watch what he says. It's really quite interesting. Our empire and race already comprise 1/5 of the world's population. Well, he meant the empire comprised 1/5 of the population, because that included the people who weren't of the British race here in India. Yes? And by our plantation of new states, by our guardianship of the seas, new states, that's the USA, yes, and down in Australia, one thing or another, and our guardianship of the seas, the great British Navy, yes, rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, and our penetrating commerce, you know about that in Indian history, by the example of our just laws and our firm constitution. Well, they didn't have a written constitution in England. India and America have a written constitution. We've gone the British one better in that way, haven't we? And above all, by the dissemination of our new arts, he meant technology, not just music and painting, yes? We stimulate the progress of mankind in a degree not to be measured. There's the optimism for the future, yes? If we lavishly and boldly push forward in the creation and distribution of our riches, it is hard to overestimate the pitch of beneficial influence to which we may attain in the present, meaning and in the near future. But the maintenance of such a position is physically impossible, because we're going to run out of coal. That was his view. He had no vision of pollution, only depletion of what he saw as the essential ingredient of the Industrial Revolution. So he said, we have to make the momentous choice between brief greatness and longer continued mediocrity. Well, the choice, it's obvious which choice they made. Yes, in England, in the United States. Yes, and what kind of choice is India making today? What kind of choice is China making today? Let us go on. Was he a false prophet? Was he not a false prophet? Jevons. Now, it was not just the socialists. We come now to the great capitalist economists. The greatest capitalist economist of the first half of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes. And in the depths of the Depression, the moment when capitalism had its, its lowest prestige, yes, he wrote in a political pamphlet, 1929, he was campaigning for Lloyd George. The future holds in store far more wealth and economic freedom than the past has ever offered. Now, this was when the mass production Henry Ford branch of the Industrial Revolution was really getting going in the 1920s, when the United States was becoming the greatest economic, which it still is today, hanging on today in that role. Okay? So this was the beginning of the American century, and the British part of all that. Yes, that's what John Maynard Keynes said. And that was the basic view, but he had not the slightest inkling of any ecological concern. You'll never find it expressed in John Maynard Keynes, any more than you do in Joseph Stiglitz, or, what was his name? Amartya. You see, they are 20th century economists. That's going to be my conclusion. Okay. We had a great president in the U.S., elected during the Depression. He had polio, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He could not walk. He had overcome his polio. He had courage. He had a wife who was one of the greatest figures of the United States in the 20th century, Eleanor Roosevelt, to whom the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is due. She did not write it, but she insisted on it. And she made her husband a great man. And when he was inaugurated, in the depths of the Depression, he gave a rousing speech when he was inaugurated, and he said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." That was a thrill to the soul of many people in the USA. And the very last sentences he ever wrote for a speech he was going to give the next day, April 15th, 1945, but he died on that day. He didn't get to give the speech. But at the very end of that speech, the very last thing he wrote, ironically, was, the only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with strong and active faith. Well, this was a great man. Do you think that's the only limit? The only kind of limit? We don't want to be cringing. Of course we want to have faith in activism, but is that the only limit? And we dominate nature that much? Now I come to the counter-argument. This, for me, I appeal to my colleague, Kumarappa. This, to me, is the smartest of the ecological economists, Kenneth Boulding, and he wrote a brilliant article just about the time that mankind started to send spaceships up to the moon and, out into outer space, and we had a picture. You could actually look back and see the whole Earth, you see. And you had these men living in spaceships out there, right? And he wrote in this wonderful article, The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth, 1966. Primitive men, and to a large extent also men of the early civilizations, imagined themselves to be living on a virtually illimitable plane. There was almost always somewhere beyond the known limits of human habitation, someplace else to go when things got too difficult, either by reason of the deterioration of the natural environment or a deterioration of the social structure in places where people happen to live. You could colonize. You could go somewhere else. You move, the horizon will move. No end. It may be that if you have a city or a village and you have land and you want to bring agriculture closer to that city, the land not nearby is not as good as the land nearby. Ricardo had seen that. But you could go somewhere else and find good land somewhere else. You could colonize. Always no boundaries. That was the basic view. And he calls that the closed earth. The open earth. He calls that the open earth. You can always colonize. The closed earth of the future requires economic principles which are somewhat different from those of the open earth of the past. I am tempted to call the open economy, the old one, the cowboy economy, the cowboy being symbolic of the illimitable plains and also associated with reckless, exploitative, romantic, and violent behavior which is characteristic of open societies. You've seen the cowboy movies. They chase after each other forever, right? Until the good guy shoots the bad guy and so on. Reckless, exploitative behavior, that's capitalism. Cut it down, chop it up. Yes, that's the Atlas shrugged, heroic, yes. The closed economy of the future might similarly be called the spaceman economy, in which the Earth has become a single spaceship. This is an aspect of globalization that we should think about. Without unlimited reservoirs of anything, either for extraction or for pollution. We not only have the bucket, but we have the sink getting overloaded. You understand? A resource for pollution is a sink where you can throw things, and you want the sink to drain properly back into the earth, and then you want the earth to turn it into something that you can use, right? If you dump into the sink faster than the sink can dispose, this is called pollution. This is a serious problem. And we're running out of sinks, not just out of buckets, yes? And therefore, man must find his place now in a cyclical ecological system which is capable of continuous reproduction of material form, even though it cannot escape having inputs of energy. Well, we don't have to worry at the deepest level about inputs of energy because we're getting a lot of energy every day. Where is it coming from? It is coming from the sun, where all the other energy came from too. The energy that the sun radiates to the earth in 1 week is more than all the energy and all the fossil fuels and wood that we've ever used. So it's not that energy at the deepest level is the problem, but of course we have a lot of technological problems of which is the better way to get it into a consumable form. Now, the difference between the two types of economy becomes most apparent in the attitude towards consumption. In the cowboy economy, consumption is regarded as a good thing, inherently. More, better. And production likewise. And of course, when you go to Keynes, you have a double value of consumption because of Keynes's concept of stimulus through stimulating consumption, and that will break the bad equilibrium that has a lot of unemployment. You stimulate consumption. So, but he's talking on a deeper level. Basically, more is better. Now, I think you can see where I'm going to head in this lecture as I move toward the Gandhian thinking. But let me come now to some people who did not get it. Yes? Here's a Nobel Prize winning economist, Robert Solow. Before he got his Nobel Prize, he wrote a famous article some years before called The Economics of Resources or the Resources of Economics, and in that he had a sentence that is a true whopper. You know that American term, a whopper? The world can, in effect, get along without natural resources. What kind of world did he mean? He must have meant the human world, I think. If he had said the natural world can get along without natural resources, I don't think they would have published the article. They would have said this is gibberish. But it was gibberish even though he meant the human world can get along without natural resources. But he got a Nobel Prize, he got a President's Award, a very prestigious economist. He didn't see any basic ecological problem. He thought that if you used enough energy, you could recycle everything. And there would never really be any real crunch. It would all be solved forever. And there was an American president influenced by that kind of thinking, and I believe Amartya has also been influenced by that kind of thinking. An American president who went to one of the first of these great big international conferences about the coming ecological crisis, and he announced the great precept, the American way of life is not negotiable. Yes? That was a world scandal. It is still a world scandal. It was a shame. I hang my head in shame about this. And because it was a shame, no other American president has ever gone to any others of these conferences because he's afraid that if he doesn't say that, he'll be voted out of office because the American people still think the American way of life is not negotiable, too many of them in the middle. You know, these elections are pretty close in the USA. And if he does say it, it'll be another scandal. So they just don't go. But we can laugh, but this is the serious problem. Now, there's another basic aspect of the whole history of economic thinking that is feeding into this unwillingness to recognize the 21st century ecological crisis that is coming in one way and another. And that is the fact that the greatest book on economics and the great tradition of economics was based on the concept of the wealth of nations. The American way of life is not. So he was concerned about a concept of American wealth. If we do it first and the Chinese don't do it, they will outproduce us, you see. And that's been going on ever since. Political leaders thinking they're talking about the wealth of their nation. And the Chinese representative at the Doha conference a month or two ago, he said, we will do it someday, we'll do it, but not yet. We still need to relieve our poverty in China. We need to do this and that. Only later can we do our share. These are people thinking about the wealth of nations rather than the welfare of humankind that will require international cooperation and compromise to solve. You understand? This is the trap we're in. This is the 21st century trap. Yes. And now I come to these last Americans. Amartya, well, you know, some of his professorships have been in America. He's a great man. Don't mistake me. Don't think I'm trying to cut him down. I'm just trying to point out a flaw. Yes. And he wrote, he has spoken twice, only twice, has he ever spoken about the problem of sustainability and ecological concern. Once was in 1998, and the second time was in 2009. And in between, he said something else of interest to this. So I'm going to read the 1998 statement. Now, I think maybe he put his name to something where somebody else had written a little more of it. This colleague from Sri Lanka, Sudhir Anand. But here's what they wrote. The fact, in a book for the United Nations, published by Oxford University, the fact of sustainability in both production and consumption implies that what we are obliged to leave behind, meaning for future generations, is a generalized capacity, there's a mark here for you, capacity to create well-being, not any particular thing or any particular resource. We do not know what the taste and preferences of the future generations will be. Well, I think he put his foot in it there. We do know that future generations are going to need the things that any good doctor can tell you that you need in the way of nutrition. Vitamin A, vitamin B this, vitamin C that, vitamin D, this mineral, that mineral, the phosphorus, those are all particular things. And the future generations are going to need it. They can't be substituted. It's not like replacing the Pony Express with the Postal Service and the Postal Service with email. Those are particular things that the future generations are going to need. You see the mistake I believe he let himself make here by getting too wrapped up in his concept of capabilities and taking on a little bit of the Solal mentality that they'll figure out something they always have. Right? Any instrumental justification for human development should not be, he meant, gripped by some impersonal objective such as conserving the environment, but relates concretely to people's ability to generate for themselves more income and other means of good living. Okay. So I think that this was a mistaken perspective. Now, that was 1998, 15 years ago. Halfway between then and now, he was at a conference, and my colleague, Mr. DeSarda, started to talk to him about our belief that we have a problem of ecological crisis and straining the Earth's capacities, we're reaching the limits, the crisis is coming, and Amartya's reply was, India certainly needs more economic growth. So that was, how many years ago now? 6 from 13, 7 years ago. India needs more economic growth. Certainly needs more economic growth. Now, what he meant in the context of Desadaji's question was India needs more GDP. But then, 3 years later, 2009, Amartya published a book together with Joseph Stiglitz, commissioned by President Sarkozy of France. You know about the report. Sarkozy has been interested in about the gross national happiness index that they're using up in Bhutan and this kind of thing, and worried about GDP. And he asked Amartya and Stiglitz and a French economist to look into this matter, and they wrote a report, and then they published a book called The Mismeasure. GDP is the mismeasure. So what I want to know from Amartya is, did he change his mind between 2006 and 2009? And if he did not change his mind, if he thinks India, like China, as the Chinese say for China, if India still needs more GDP, then what kind of GDP? Are we talking, does he believe in the wisdom of the market, what Desardaji called blind growth? You see, there are economists, Friedrich von Hayek is the model of this, who believe that the wisdom of the market is there. But I'll tell you something. Suppose you do believe in the wisdom of the market, which I do not. But suppose you do. These concerns of the future generations, they will need the food security of the future. Those people are babies and unborn, and they cannot bid in the market today. They might be concerned, but there's no way that they could inject their voice into the market. So it's really quite tricky here, and I want, by putting Amartya's name in the title of my lecture, I want to stimulate him to come out and say the rest. Bring out the implications of what he said in 2009 a little bit. Tell us whether he still believes what he wrote in 1998, you see, and qualify what he said, if he wants to qualify it, in 2006. This is not a politician who's afraid somebody could vote against him if he doesn't say this or does say that. This is a seeker after truth. We need him. Now I come to part 2. Gandhi brought in Gandhi was not an economist. He read very little economics. He read some Adam Smith here, and Mahadev told him something about Marx. Mahadev read more Marx than Gandhi, but Gandhi had some inkling. This was a view that Gandhi expressed in Gujarati in 1927. If nature, Kudrata, yes, if nature has implanted in its creation the instinct for food, it also produces enough food to satisfy that instinct from day to day, but it does not produce a jot more, not the tiniest bit more, than enough to satisfy the instinct. That is nature's way, but man, blinded by his selfish greed, grabs and consumes more than his requirements in defiance of nature's principle, in defiance of the elementary and immutable moralities of non-stealing and non-possession of others' property. You recognize this is Gandhi all over, yes? And thus brings down no end of misery upon himself and his fellow creatures. Well, he had this puritanical tendency. I think this is overstated. I think this is a mystical view of nature. I don't think there's that much balance in nature. I don't think nature is that organic. I think much more sensible than this statement is the famous one that he came up with in talking with Pyarelal in 1947, that the earth, Prithvi, provides enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So yes, we get along with some greed, but we have to do it. So this is a Gandhian element coming in. Do you want to want more? Should you be obese, or should you just have a decent meal, and all the rest of it? And this is it. God forbid that India should ever take to industrialism after the manner of the West. The economic imperialism of a single tiny island kingdom is today keeping the world in chains. 1928. If an entire nation of 300 millions, he did not imagine it could ever be 1,200 millions, an entire nation of 300 millions took to similar economic exploitation, it would strip the world bare like locusts. Well, this is not very articulate as the distinction between pollution and depletion, but there's an ecological concern. And then Gandhi, in the last 10 years of his life, began to say that the Isha Upanishad was the essence of Hinduism. Yes? And that is important for me culturally because it contrasts with the basic biblical injunction in the book of Genesis that God blessed the first humans and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply. Do we want to go on multiplying forever? This is the no sense of Malthus here. And replenish the earth, agriculture without end, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. There's a big cultural difference here. And what Gandhi is doing is bringing in a Hindu precept that is not there in the biblical background. This biblical injunction is what underlies culturally the capitalist idea. Dig it down, chop it up, burn it, all the rest of it. Now here's a sensible statement by Gandhi. A certain degree of physical harmony and comfort is necessary. If you don't have enough, you need more. If you don't have enough. That's not the issue today in the U.S. It hasn't been the issue for 30 or 40 years in the U.S. Lots of us have enough in the U.S. If we redistribute it, lots of us would be happier with less in the U.S. and the people to whom it was distributed. But above a certain level, it becomes a hindrance instead of a help. So you know this line of thinking in Gandhi. Let me move on now to get to Comm. Gandhi in 1908 in Hind Swaraj used this phrase, 9 days wonder, to refer to modern Western civilization. Which day were we on then? Which day are we on now? If it is a 9 days wonder, and I believe it is in some way, it's not a good metaphor, then we want to think. It's not the same day now as it was 100 years ago, right? We don't want to be on day 9. We don't want to see that. Where are we? That's an interesting way of thinking of it. And here's the one I like the best. Civilization, in the real sense of the term, consists not in the multiplication, but in the deliberate and voluntary reduction of wants. How much do you want to want? If you have enough, is it important to want more? That's the way the capitalist system is working. That's why they have all these advertisements. You may have noticed there's some advertisements in the newspaper out in the street, but they're trying to get you to want more, even if you have enough, yes? That alone Deliberate and voluntary reduction of wants promotes real happiness and contentment and increases the capacity for service, which is a deeper cause of human happiness for Gandhi. Yes? If I have one wife and it's a good wife, should I want 10? Yes? If I have 3 shirts and they're nice, I choose them carefully, should I have 10 to look sexier? Or can I look sexy with 3? You understand? I could go down the whole list here when you have enough. Now, I will speak more about this tomorrow, but I just want you to realize the gravity of the situation. Here's a summary last year of the situation described in a very diligent American book called The Race for What's Left, the Global Scramble for the World's Last Resources. The book is mainly about depletion. Never have we seen the same combination of factors that confronts us today. 1, a lack of any unexplored resource reserves beyond those now being eyed for development. In other words, all big corporations and some of the big countries, they know where the last possibilities of oil and gas are to be exploited, be located. They're looking, they're bidding for property rights to drill here and that sort of thing. So there's no more, they have a vision of the bottom of the Earth's bucket here. Yes. Secondly, the sudden emergence of rapacious new consumers. He's not talking about me. I'm a rapacious old consumer. He's not talking about my grandchildren. They qualify as rapacious old consumers because they live in the US, where we have been rapacious for 100 years. He's talking about the sudden emergence of the new rapacious consumers. He's talking about the Chinese, the Brazilians, I don't know, maybe some people in some other countries. You see. That's what he's talking about. Technical and environmental limitations on the exploitation of new deposits. It costs a lot more energy to get oil out of an oil well up in the Arctic Sea 3 miles underneath with storm than it costs to get it out of the Texas oil well. It may be that for some of these new oil wells, you only get about 3 times as much in toto as you have to spend to get it in the first place, so that they're getting less efficient. Unlike what happened to the steam engines in the 19th century, my friends, they got more and more efficient throughout the 19th century. The extraction of the remaining parts of the bucket is going to be less and less efficient on a macro level. And fourth, the one I've talked about already, the devastating effects of climate change. I've mentioned that already. I don't need to go on. We don't know how devastating they'll be and how quickly, but that is a real concern. In many cases, the commodities procured during this new round of extraction will represent the final supplies of their type. And now, I come to the last part of this lecture, and I hope I have time to do it. Because it's about a man who, like Gandhi, a Gandhian, a man who, like Gandhi, managed to die on January 30th, 12 years to the day after Gandhi died. He studied in New York in the 1920s at Columbia University, and I think that Sagarji mentioned that one of his 2 main professors was also the professor under whom Ambedkar got his doctorate in economics, Kumarappa, who changed his name from Cornelius to Kumarappa during this time to take an Indian name rather than the British name that his grandfather had taken. Kumarappa got a master's degree with a thesis updating the drain of wealth concept to the 1920s. And it was sent to Gandhi, who liked it, and then Kumarappa came to visit Gandhi. He was at Sabarmati walking around, couldn't find him, and he saw an old man sitting on the ground on the sand there. And Kumarappa was dressed in his silk suit and silk hat. He was a professor of accounting in Mumbai. And he asked this old man, "Can you help me find the Mahatma?" And the old man said, "Well, you have found him." And Kumarappa sat down on the sand in his silk suit. Gandhi knew he could get him. You understand? Yes, I could tell you more stories like this. Anyway, there he is when he retired in 1953. He had been, so let me give you his career here. He was born in 1892 in Tanjore, near Madurai. His grandfather had been converted to Christianity, so the grandson studied at Doveton College, a Christian college in Madras, and he was taught there that God had given India to to Britain in trust to civilize it by converting it to Christianity and bringing it all the benefits of modern capitalism and all that kind of thing. And then he studied accounting in London, became a certified public accountant, and was then flourishing in Bombay in the 1920s after the First World War. He came back, and he co-founded an auditing firm and taught at a college of commerce. And then he visited the USA. He had two brothers who got doctorates in the USA in other topics, and he got degrees in commerce and economics. His degree in economics was at Columbia University, a master's degree in 1929. And he undertook at Gandhi's request, then, when he came back, that day when he was sitting on the ground in his silk suit, an economic survey of a taluk in the province of Gujarat. He drew up the questionnaire in English. He didn't have any Gujarati. The students of the Gujarat Vidyapith administered these questionnaires to everybody in 50 villages, and Kumarappa then tallied all the evidence. So he knew really microeconomically what was going on, beyond what money could tell you. He knew every economic activity that anybody in those 50 villages was doing, insofar as he could capture it in a list of 200 or 300 questions in the questionnaire. And so between 1930 and 33, two of his books. One is Public Finance and Our Poverty. That was his master's essay, and it was published in 5 languages. Gandhi really liked it. And the second was the Survey of Matar Taluka. They were published. And he left Bombay now, and now he was a Gandhian. And he went to prison from time to time. He was active in the independence. In 1934, there was an earthquake in Bihar, and the government didn't do anything about the relief. And so it was a big private effort, and Kumarappa kept the accounts. And there were thousands and thousands of donors, and he lost almost none of them, less than a half dozen of them. You can get their donations properly accounted for and recognized. And Gandhi, seeing that, and there were some other interesting stories that led Gandhi to request Kumarappa to co-found with him the All India Village Industries Association. And this was the first smallest beautiful intermediate technology association. And so they did that in 1934. In 1935, Kumarappa was still speaking for the All India Congress Committee in regard to the fiscal relations between England and her greatest colony, the Republic of India. So they published that book. He wrote his worst book in 1936 for the All India Village Industries Association, called Why the Village Movement. It's his worst book, and he divided everybody into 2 categories. There were the good people, the bad people, the vegetarians, the carnivores, the dark-skinned people, the light-skinned people, like that. They had a whole list of dualities. Then in 1939 and 1940, he did new surveys of hundreds of villages in the central provinces and in the northwest frontier provinces. So by now, he knew more about what was going on economically in India on the ground than anybody else. He didn't question the people himself. He didn't have the languages. He did all his writing in English, but he had assistants do all this. Oxford University Press had considerable regard for him. They published in 1942 a book about economic problems in India, and he was one of the 5 contributors to that. He spent 1943 to 45 in prison, like everybody else at the top of the Congress. He came out, and in 1945 published a book he had written in prison, one of 2 books he had written. This one was called Economy of Permanence. Now that title is important. What do you mean when you say economy of permanence? You mean you're talking about ecological concerns and sustainability. Other economists had understood that there are ecological concerns, and not least Karl Marx. There's a fine book called Marx's Ecology, but it wasn't at the center of their theory. Kumarappa was the first economist to put ecological concerns at the center of his theory, and I will say more about that in a moment. Nehru didn't quite know what to make with him. He sent him abroad to Japan, to China, to Vienna for a conference of pacifists and so on. He wrote then, in 1949, he was asked by the Congress to write a report of the Agrarian Reforms Committee, and he gathered reams of documents. I've seen them in the Nehru Memorial Museum. And he wrote this extremely diligent report, and they just put it in the wastebasket because he was advocating more land reform than the Congress wanted to do, because the Congress was basically a landowner's firm. So he was now a marginalized figure in the political scene. he went on publishing Gandhian Economy and Other Essays, Gandhian Economic Thought. That's actually a better book than Economy of Permanence, in my opinion. And then in 1952, as the second 5-year plan came down, he co-founded an organization to protest against Nehru's top-down policies called Arctic Samakamantal. He retired the next year. We saw his photo then. And he died on 30th of January, 1960. Now, he was a welfare economist. He had this picture when he retired. He had this picture on the wall in the cabin, and people would ask him, who is that? And he would say, it's my master's master. My master is the Mahatma, and his master is the poorest peasant. So he was concerned about, not just about the future and a concept of sustainability. He was concerned about people, and that's what he was doing in the All India Village Industries Association. And back in Warga, he lived in a cabin like this, which had been designed like a Sevagram, to be buildable by local techniques and local materials. It's a beautiful little cabin. It's a museum piece now. And here's the main thing about him as an economic theorist, that he put these concerns at the center. He did not have the word ecology at his disposal. He spoke in turn about depletion on page 1 of Economy of Permanence. The world possesses a certain stock or reservoir of such materials as coal, petroleum, ores, or minerals like iron, copper, gold, etc. These being available in fixed quantities may be said to be transient, while the current of flowing water in a river or the constantly growing timber of a forest may be considered permanent, as their stock is inexhaustible in the service of man, if only the flow or increase is taken advantage of. That's the trick there. You can't use the renewables faster than they renew themselves. So there has to be a factor in the equation about the Earth's capacities to renew renewables if you're going to be a decent ecological economist. Basing our life pattern on the economy of permanence paves the way for world peace. He was writing this during the Second World War. While the other kind of economy, this is my reading here, based on dwindling sources of consumable energy and raw materials, leads to disharmony, unhealthy competition. He did not imply that all competition had to be unhealthy, enmity, and world war. So that's a very, very well-reasoned grasp of the issue of depletion. But he also had a very well-reasoned grasp, basic grasp, of the issues of pollution, which includes loss of ecosystems. Beyond the pale of human society are our mute brethren who minister to our needs. Mute brethren, you don't get that much in Christianity. Yeah, only the humans have souls in Christianity. Our mute brethren who minister to our needs, animals, birds, etc. They and the land we draw our sustenance from, the water, the sunlight, the air, and the rest of the physical world claim our attention and regard while we strive to satisfy our needs. If we fail to consider these factors, nature will retaliate. Gandhian economic thought, last page. This is not love. This is not St. Francis. This is fear. Yes, fear. There are some people today who have a mystical belief in Gaia, in the capacity of the earth to settle everything for us. But the brightest person of that camp, Lynn Margrave, she says, Gaia is a mean bitch. No. Kumarappa understood that. We have reason to fear. We don't just love nature. But Kumarappa was not a primitivist. He did not want to go back. He understood that reclaiming wilderness may be necessary, but it is never sufficient, because humankind long ago went over to agriculture. And we are many too many now to go back. Yes? The main trouble with man arises out of the fact that he is endowed with a free will and possesses a wide field for its play. By exercising this gift, and he put free will in quotes, that's very interesting because he was a Christian, he was supposed to believe in it, but he was willing to acknowledge that it's only a theoretical concept. But there's something there. We have agency. Agency, yes? A wide field for its play. In exercising this gift in the proper way, he can consciously bring about a much greater cooperation and coordination of nature's units than any other living being. That's technocracy. You understand? He's not a primitivist. He's not saying, let's go back to the woods and just be hunters and gatherers. There's nothing romantic about it in that sense. Conversely, by using it wrongly, he can create quite a disturbance in the economy of nature and in the end destroy himself. When Kumarappa gets it right, he gets it very right. And his definition of permanence was nothing to do with light years and billions. He said, if the time span is astronomical, then, for the economist, that's permanent. We don't have to worry about the heat death of the universe. So the whole entropy argument doesn't have to be taken metaphysically for Kumarappa. You understand? This is a man who again and again had deep insights. Now, I would love to tell you much more. Here's the permanence. Human life rarely reaches even 100 years, while the unit to measure the life of nature will run into astronomical figures. It is in this relative sense that we speak of an economy of permanence. Now, I would love, because of my love for Kumarappa, whom I, however, criticize more than I do Amartya, because I know him better, I would love to tell you all about him. But I think we've used up my time between my one thing. But let me just show you that there is a lot more to say. He had a concept, I'll end with this one. When he got over his anger in the mid-30s about the bad Westerners and the bad carnivores and the good Indians and so on, then while he was in prison in the early 1940s, he came up with a concept of 5 grades of moral quality in our economic behavior. The worst was the predatory. You kill something else and eat it up. The second worst is parasitical. You're not killing, you're just, we call it rental. Rents and eat. Yes, predatory. The third is enterprising. Well, that's the capitalism. That's good. It's better than parasitical. You understand? Yes, good, productive capitalism is better than bad, parasitical financial dealing. Okay, that's the third. The fourth is communal. That's socialism. That's good. And the best is pure service. And Kumarappa sees as the model of pure service the same metaphor that Gandhi sees as the model of the nonviolence of the strong. That is the mother nursing her baby. She's just serving the baby. She's so much stronger than the baby, she doesn't have to worry, and she's just serving the baby. Now, Kumarappa said that every one of us has all 5 of these elements in some part of our economic activity, you see. But he also said, he was optimistic about this, that history shows a general tendency to move up the scale. Now, that's an interesting idea. Let's hope that that is true, and that we can thus avoid the Malthusian prophecy. Thank you.